This podcast is part of the Pull Up a Chair podcast network. Let's build community through connection, conversation, and collaboration.
What does it mean to be happy? 'Cause it looks like we all don't know. Glass half full or empty. Man, we just putting on a show.
Welcome to How's That Working For You Season 2. It's your girls Kat and V, but this time we're taking deeper dives into mental health and breaking stigmas. So get ready because things are about to get real and personal. How's That Working For You is a passion project created with the intention of creating space and awareness around mental health topics that are often hard to talk about. We are not professionals in the field of mental health, but we speak from our own personal experience and thoroughly conduct our own research to help educate others on why it's important to join this conversation.
Trigger warning, today's episode will talk about childhood abuse, childhood trauma, rape, battery, and murder. So if you don't think that you're emotionally ready or capable of listening to this episode, please move on to a future one. Hey Kat, what's up?
Nothing much, except I wanted to talk about families and how they exist in the realm of mental illness. So I'm going to start off by saying, according to a study that we will be linking in...
all the links for this episode will be found on our website, which will be linked on our Instagram and down below at the description of this podcast.
Yeah, okay. So according to a study that nearly 50% of all mental illnesses begin in childhood before the age of 14 years, and over 20% of parents have mental illness. So keep in mind that this is just what's reported.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah. There's another source, the Mental Health Foundation. On their page, they say that approximately 68% of women and 57% of men with mental health problems are parents. Okay? Again, these are just the reported statistics, right? So this is excluding all the people who are undiagnosed and have no idea that they may have mental illness as well. So that being said, as everyone who's been listening to the podcast knows, I have ADHD, which we just recently found out is actually considered a mental illness, bipolar disorder, and then anxiety and all the things that kind of get lumped in with that type of diagnosis. Now, neither of my parents were ever diagnosed with anything. We suspect that my dad has ADHD. I personally think that my mom's side of the family has a lot of issues, but they will never admit to it. I personally think my mom might be, like, her gene pool might be the reason why I have bipolar disorder, because my great aunt was diagnosed with bipolar disorder, and I believe it was bipolar 1, which is I don't know if it's more severe, but it's definitely like a different type of bipolar disorder that tends to have more erratic symptoms, and their mania is much more, it's just a lot, like, the mania in bipolar 1 is a little bit more defined and what people tend to think about when they think of bipolar disorder, whereas my mania is called hypomania, and it's a less intense version of that. And I never really had hallucinations or anything that some people with bipolar 1 might experience during their manic episodes.
So it's a little bit more extreme.
Either way. Yeah, it's just a little more extreme, yeah. And their cycles tend to happen more rapidly, whereas with bipolar 2, hypomania and depression, kind of like those phases tend to last like months at a time or something like that. At least that's how it manifested in me personally. Like we've talked about before, mental illness manifests differently in everybody. So you can't really take one perception of a diagnosis and pin it on everybody who has that diagnosis. So that's why we're so careful and we try to do our research before talking about topics like this, because it's just such a it's a very complex topic to talk about. Anyway, I brought up those stats because for me, my family is Vietnamese, and my parents and everyone in my parents' generation immigrated from Vietnam, in my parents' case, to America. And my mom's siblings kind of went everywhere, but that's not important. So for me, as a first generation Vietnamese American girl, mental illness was a really rough concept for my parents to really understand. I think one conversation I had with my dad was like, my dad speaking, I escaped communism and I like came to America with like nothing except the clothes on my back. And I like got through it without therapy and all this type of stuff. It's like, it doesn't make any sense to me for why you need therapy. So that's something. And my dad, I would say, even though we suspect he has ADHD, he's the more neurotypical and stable of my two parents. My mom is, I want to respectfully say that she's a lot. Like,
she's extra.
Extra, yes. She's a little extra. She's a little less socially aware of her behavior when it comes to what's socially acceptable to, and this might be a little bit the cultural barrier as well. But my mom, for example, when I was at Dominican University, my mom and I was like really struggling and I wanted to drop out, and it was a really, really sad and rough time for my family and me. My mom would like go to the office and beg the people in the office to like try to find a way to help me stay in school, which in hindsight, I really thank her for, but also, I will always stand by this. It was so embarrassing.
I can only imagine.
So embarrassing. Like, yeah. And, and that's just an example of how unaware she can be. It's like, she would just show up, like, without any type of notification. She would just show up and, like, demand to be seen by whoever was in the office. That's just a part. I just wanted to give our listeners some context about what my mom's behavior is like. She's also very emotional. She'll always, if I try to give her any type of like feedback on how she's behaving, she'll like point something out in me that's a flaw and be like, well, you're like that. Why? Like, what are you to say? And tell me that I'm like this. She's a very defensive person. Needless to say, she's still 100% the one that would never admit that she had any issues. I mentioned those statistics because it's like, if we as a society could educate parents more about what mental illness is, this could really help kids who have mental illness move further along in their treatment, and really, like, we can avoid all this trauma that tends to happen when parents don't know what their kid's going through or what their kids need and stuff like that. I also found another article, and it's by the American Association of Marriage and Family Therapy, and they use the term, I believe it's COMI. It's an acronym, COMI, and it's childhood onset mental illness. So this is the term that's used to describe mental illnesses that are diagnosed in children at a younger age. And for me, I think that my diagnosis of ADHD would have fallen under that category. And for me, I think that, I don't remember exactly how my mom took it, but my dad was surprisingly receptive to it. He bought all the books, and this is, my dad's such a good dad. Like, even though he's not perfect, he doesn't like say all the best things all the time, he's a really good father. He went out and bought all the books on ADHD, like parenting with ADHD, what ADHD looks like in kids and women. And like, I feel like that's a really good model of parenting to kind of live by. Maybe I should backtrack and say like how I got diagnosed. like the reason why I got diagnosed was because I wasn't doing well in school. I wasn't like, I believe that I wasn't making friends very well. And I was different from the kids. So I think the school went and told my parents that they think that I might have some condition that needs to be looked at. And that's how I got diagnosed with ADHD.
It's because of the school.
Yes. And I think that happens a lot with kids.
Yeah. I mean, if it wasn't for the court system, I would have never gone to grief counseling after 2 family members died.
I mean,
2 immediate caregivers.
Yeah, which were like the most close to you, like the ones that really cared for you as well.
Yeah,
like,
which I like. Programs like that are really important. It's really important as, you know, if you're dealing with children, to be somebody who reports stuff like that, because it can really help get kids the help they need early.
I think that there's like I've mentioned before, there's always room for improvement. I think that schools are doing a decent, like depending on the school, I think that they're doing a decent job at like at least making parents aware of something that's going on with their kids. So they're not always right. They're not always like good, because there are like horror stories about it and like, you know, misdiagnoses and whatever, but we're not. Yeah, there's effort, exact. But because of that, I was diagnosed with ADHD, and that helped. They took me to the general like pediatrician, and he prescribed me with Adderall. And I think I've told this story before, but when I had when he prescribed me with Adderall, like my parents told me that there was a moment where I went to them as a kid and said, "Wow, I can finally focus on stuff." And that's me as like as like an 8-year-old or a 7-year-old kid. So I don't know. And I also feel like that is also an indication of like how aware kids can be as well. Like if kids can see something in themselves, it's like I think parents should also listen. And also like especially in a case like you, V, where it's like you were also very more mature because you had to be for your age. Like it's just so sad for me to hear about your case where it's like you were actually trying to voice your feelings and trying to ask for help, and your family made fun of you for it. Like that's just
I think part of it is kids get dismissed very often and very easily. Like, oh, they're a child, what do they know about the world? Well, they might not know a lot about the world, but they know how they're feeling.
Yeah, and they'll be very vocal about it.
Yeah, I mean, to a point. After you beat a child down enough, they'll stop.
Yeah, it's just that's why we're talking about this, is because like I think in order to be good caregivers, you have to be so aware of your children and how they're feeling. And I don't know, in a lot of cases, kids grow up kind of like, I feel like, correct me if I'm wrong, I feel like, at least for me, and maybe for you, I am grateful that I turned out the way that I am. Because...
Oh, yes, 100%. It could have been bad.
It could have been bad. It could have been so bad. Like, I'm getting to more of my story. It's just like, it came to a point where my family, like my parents, they were very focused, because they were immigrants. They were very focused on like creating the American dream and like working and making money and stuff like that. And I don't fault them for it at all, but they didn't really tend to me as a kid a lot. And when it came time for me to like go to progress in school, like in 7th grade, I really wasn't doing well in school because of my ADHD, I think. Who knows? I was a kid. So either way, they sent me to live with a family member of mine that they thought would be a better role model because they had gone to college here in America and they were responsible and they were much older than me. For context, if she had had a child as soon as she got married, that kid would be either my age or a year younger. So she's like I want to say that she's in the silent generation. Either way, she's in the silent generation, but she's also like an immigrant too. She moved from Vietnam to a different country and then to America. So either way, so she had her roots started in Vietnam. So she parented with a lot of the parenting style that originated in Vietnamese culture, which, and I've talked about this to some people, with some people before, like what's the norm in parenting in Asian cultures could be arguably, not even arguably, it would be considered child abuse here in America.
Yeah.
And I've been really thinking on how I was going to address this issue publicly, because I don't want to out my family by any means, but I feel like at this point I'm old enough where it's like I'm a grown woman now. Nothing needs to happen anymore because I'm living my own life and I'm like fine now. But if I were to have said anything when I was a kid, it would destroy my family. Like, it would destroy what was probably this family member's marriage, or what was like custody of this person's kids, like all the things. If I were to talk about what was going on with me more adamantly, with either like counselors at school or anything like that. At this point in my life, I feel like it needs to be said, because cultural differences, the way that they are, so sad, because I recently saw an example of parenting style from someone of the same generation as my other family member parent their kid. And it was almost identical to the way that I was parented by my family member. And I'm really glad that this kid reached out to me, because I was able to empathize with this person and really tell them that it's okay, it gets better. And it's, for me, when this kid was saying like, well, I wish I could go to authorities and blah, 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 and talk about that. And then it pained me to say that I had to say like, well, you're not going to live with them forever. And like, imagine what would happen for your younger sibling if you did this, and like all the stuff. And it just pained me to say, as if I was sequestering what she felt and what she wanted to do to feel safe, because it's such a
hard situation.
It's such a hard situation, because, you don't want to tear apart your family, but you also want to feel safe in your house. And I think for me as an individual, the only thing I can do is share my story as an adult. So maybe somebody out there might hear it and understand that it's, I don't know, hopefully it influences somebody who's doing the wrong thing,
Yeah.
Or at least somebody who's close to somebody who's parenting the wrong, I don't want to say parenting the wrong way, but like who's doing something that's not good for their kid, who's in a place where they can intervene, is what I'm saying. Because it gets really sticky when issues like this arise, when there's a cultural barrier like that. Because in America, a lot of the things that were done to me to discipline me would have 100% been considered abuse. Is this even relevant to what we're talking about?
I think it's important to talk about, because in a lot of Latin cultures, it's the same way. Like, you smack your child and they do wrong, and you smack them once and you smack them hard and they get over it. But you don't do that here.
No.
You don't smack your kids. I mean, and then that brings up the whole, well, should you really parent shame?
Yes,
And
exactly.
what it all boils down to is the things we do to our children turn into the issues that they deal with in life.
For example, you and I have so much trauma.
God.
So much trauma. And, we turned it into quirky character flaw. Quirky.
Yeah, quirky character flaws.
Yeah, like we turned it into that, but not everyone does.
It was said by a separate family member that my anxiety came from a different family member because they would berate me whenever a pillow was crooked. And I can imagine if I lived with these family members my whole lives, the amount of anxiety I would have would be astronomical. What you do to your kids stay with them because it's their formative years. Their brains are developing.
I've watched this true crime case a million times because the girl is also Vietnamese with tiger parents, and it just shocked me, to say the least. Of course, this girl's a sociopath, and she deserves everything that happened to her. She deserves to stay in jail and everything like that. But it's an example of what could happen if your kid doesn't understand how to process trauma and strictness.
If they don't know how to handle what they're feeling and what their needs are, if they don't feel like there's any way out of their situation.
Yes. So the girl's name is Jennifer Pan. She was 28 at the time that she was found guilty. And the whole situation is that her parents were tiger parents. And I don't know if we've talked about this on the show before, but tiger parents are it's the name that has been coined to describe primarily Asian parents who push their kids to the limits in order to perform well in school and be the best that they can, essentially. So what happened was that her parents had such high expectations of her, in terms of wanting her to get good grades and not date and all this stuff, that she felt compelled to lie about what happened when she graduated. I think she lied about graduating high school was one of the things. She forged her high school graduation documents, and then she continued to forge documents of her getting into college, and then also those grades, I believe. This girl was living an entire lie to her parents, who really expected the world from her. And I remember her history being that she didn't do well. She wasn't bad at school, but she wasn't an A student, which is what most Asian families expected their kids, including mine, which is why they sent me to a different household so that person could help me get A's in school. She wasn't doing well in school, but then she had ice skating to lean on. That was her outlet. But then she injured herself and she couldn't do that anymore. So she just basically didn't really have any sort of way to cope with what was going on. So she instead chose to be a compulsive liar and lie about her entire life. And I'm not saying that it's the parents' fault. I'm not saying that it's the parents' fault, because she's 100% accountable for, she has to be 100% accountable for what she did. Because no matter what, I had a very similar upbringing to this woman. I didn't end up murdering my family. She hired hitmen to murder both of her parents. But so her mom passed away at the crime scene. Her dad at the time was able to stay conscious enough to run outside and scream, and then he was rushed to the hospital because by the way, he was shot in the face.
God.
Yeah. So I can't imagine, but she had called 911, and that was a whole issue, and it's turning into a true crime podcast, and I don't want it to. But basically, she got caught because her dad didn't die, and he told the story. And can you imagine that type of dynamic? How toxic that entire situation must be for one, this girl to feel like she has to lie about her life in order to be on good terms with her parents, and two, for this girl to think that it was okay to, like, or not okay, but like to think that it was a good idea and that she was going to get away with murdering her parents so that she can have the freedom that she felt like she deserved.
That is intense. Honestly, that is so intense.
Well, that's just what I'm trying to say when I say that, like, I'm so glad that we turned out the way that we did.
Yeah, no, it could have been bad. It could have been real bad.
It could have been so bad.
I'd like to take a moment to thank Kat for being so brave as to share more of her story and being open about her experiences, especially stuff like this that is just really hard to talk about and share with strangers, basically.
Yeah. Also, I want to, like, bring note to, like, the family members of this, like, of the true crime, of the people who are involved in the true crime. It's like we're not bringing this up to, like, bring shame on any of these people, but we're just using them as examples to show the importance of having a healthy upbringing as a kid. You know?
Yeah, we mean no disrespect.
Yes, exactly. But yeah, there's another one. Like, there's so many cases of serial killers who, or just murderers in general, who had really bad childhood upbringings, and that's like, ultimately, like, that stems from, or whatever, their violence and whatever mental illness they have stems from the way that their parents treated them as kids. Like the Unabomber. I don't know if you've seen anything on the Unabomber. I think that he was sick as a kid, so the nurses, the doctors wouldn't let his parents come visit, and then he ended up being very distant because he didn't get that skin on skin contact and that, like, imprinting that happens when the mom takes care of her baby. And then on top of that, he went to, I believe it was Harvard, and they did a study on different ways you can motivate people to do well, or to do well in school or something like that. It was something of that nature. I could be wrong, but either way, it was more abuse on top of, like, whatever he experienced as a kid. And then he decided that, wow, I'm going to go blow up all the people that I think are contributing to this society that treated me wrong.
Like, everybody, or most people at least, do stuff for a reason, even if that reason doesn't necessarily make sense. And as a family member, some things that you can do to help your family member struggling is to think about how you interact with them. Are you being supportive? Are you being helpful? Are you being nagging? Are you being rude? Like, take stock of how you are treating people. Help people find help, because you're not always the person who can fix them, even if you want to.
I think it's also important to be, like, self-aware if you can, too. And it's just like, if your kid has a diagnosis, and kudos to you if you even went so far as to bringing your kid to a doctor to get diagnosed, because that's something that needs to be applauded and normalized, okay? Like, so chances are, if your kid was diagnosed with something, a lot of mental illnesses are actually genetic. So there could be a chance that either you or someone else in your family who's part of that gene pool has whatever your kid has too. So it's like, you could learn more about yourself, you can learn more about your family, and I feel like there's no wrong that could come out of just looking into it, you know? Yeah, there's so many different ways that mental illness can occur. And a lot of the times it occurs from a very young age, and that's why it's so important. It's so important to be aware of your child's feelings and how they're doing, and always check in with them. They can't communicate everything, but for the most part, just being able to open that conversation up with them is doing a lot, you know?
Yeah, it's helpful.
Yeah.
All right. With this in mind, how are you going to raise your kids?
Am I going to have kids? It's like, with the world that we live in right now, do I really want to bring children into this world? Like, I mean, all jokes aside, I've talked about this with the person that I'm with, and, you know, it's going to be a different journey for me than most people because I take medication to keep me stable as somebody with bipolar disorder. And in order to prevent those medications from causing mutations and things to my baby, I would have to go off of them. And on top of that, I'll be very hormonal on top of the symptoms of my mental illness. So who knows? Who really knows? Because I'm sure that it can be done. And if I do choose to go that route, which I'm not saying I am or I'm not at this point, because I have several more years before I even want to think about that decision. I'm just saying, like, oh, I guess that's also another point to make, is that if you are diagnosed with a mental illness and you do take medication for it, it's like, you know, I think that first of all, people like us who are taking medication and who are taking care of our mental illnesses have an advantage because we know how to manage the mental illness. So if it happens to occur in our children, we can at least have some foresight on how to talk to them and take care of them and whatnot. However, I think the pregnancy itself, the pregnancy itself might be an issue, and I don't want to exclude the possibility of me ever having children because of that. Because I know that if I have a partner that deeply cares about me and a support system that also cares about me and is mindful and aware of my behavior when I'm off my medication, I'm sure that it can be done safely, basically, is what I'm trying to say. Anyway, on that note, I feel like all I know for me, because I can't go back and change what happened, and I am lucky to have, like I said, turned out the way that I have. Like, I feel like our future generation has a better shot, basically, because people like me and other kids who experience, or adults who've experienced that as a child, we can be more vocal about it, and we can parent our kids differently, because unfortunately it's much more difficult to communicate this to a generation that doesn't understand, or it's just sickening how justified some of these people are in the way that they parent. Like,
yeah,
it's just anyway, that's just all I want to say, is that, like, if you've experienced anything like this as a kid, and you are now an adult, just know that you can give your kids and other people who are younger than you, who reach out to you, a different shot at living a better childhood or adolescence than you did, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Hopefully.
All right. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to this podcast wherever you're listening to it.
Follow us on all of our socials.
Down below. If you'd like to further research any of the topics we talked about today, once again, check out our website.
See you next week.
All right. See you next week.
Bye.
Bye.
Oh, you know, I try to find a purpose in my life to drive me, to guide me. Oh, doctor, I feel dead inside.
Interested in sponsoring our podcast? Want to be heard by our audience? All sponsorships through our non-for-profit are tax deductible. More information can be found in the description of this podcast.
Drink Something, Say Something is the podcast for those of you who are tired of other beer podcasts. Tired of the jargon, tired of all the rigmarole. We're going to bring on brewers, bartenders, and everything in between to talk about anything and everything from beer to the rest of the universe. Come crack one open with us every other Thursday.